So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alexandre Kolev. I'm leading the work on social cohesion at the OECD Development Center. And I would like to welcome you to this third session of the USP 2030 conference, which is on achieving universal social protection. And I have the pleasure, actually, to co-chair this session with my colleague, Epu Mikkonen, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland. So at a time where, debates about universal social protection are generating much attention, we thought that it would be extremely important, actually, to have this session to better understand some of the opportunities and challenges to implement universal and sustainable social protection systems as set out in SDG 1.3. And this is why, our main objective in this session will be to explore some of the pathways to universal social protection that countries at different stages of development and from different regions of the world have been taken. So this afternoon, we're going to hear from government officials about the experiences of countries that have made good progress in achieving universal coverage, different stages of the life cycle, including, takeaways from recent experience, such as universal health coverage, child benefits, and old age pensions. We also will be listening to social protection experts about the ways to extend social protection to informal economy workers. Now, it is not a secret that the road to universal social protection can be difficult. Recent evidence shows indeed that in many countries which are poor, progress has not been without challenges. One common challenge is to ensure a strong and long-term willingness of governments and taxpayers to invest in the expansion of social protection. So, for many of us here, this may be at odds, with the fact that social protection has gained in recent years an ever greater recognition, not only as a fundamental human right, but also as an effective way to tackle poverty and vulnerability. However, the feedback that we are receiving is that, in many countries, making a strong investment case for social protection during budget discussions can remain a difficult task, not least since the economic impact of social protection investments remain overall insufficiently documented, and also because contrasting views still exist about the contribution of social protection to growth and equity. In this context, at the OECD, we have been actually recently looking at the impact of social protection on inclusive growth, and the findings actually do indicate that social protection investment can make good economic sense, and we really do hope that this type of findings will help build a more solid economic case for investing in social protection. Another challenge, particularly in countries with a large informal economy, is to find the appropriate modalities to expand coverage in a way that recognises the diversity of informal economy workers and provide them with solutions that are fair, efficient, and sustainable. So in recent research that we did jointly with the ILO has been looking at the vulnerability challenge in the informal economy. And one important conclusion of this research, using the new OECD key indicators of informality based on individuals and households, is that adding the household dimension into the profiling of informal workers is important for the formalization agenda, as it casts new lights on the various channels at the household level through which social protection can reach informal workers. So in the sample of countries for which we had data, we find that on average about 1/3 of informal workers live in poor households and could be a priori covered if social assistance was extended to all eligible poor households. Another average of 40% live in food-secure households and could a priori afford to enroll in contributory social protection schemes, while another quarter actually live in mixed households. That means with other members of the households that are actually working in the formal economy that are covered by formal social protection schemes, and that's also another way of looking at the possibility to extend some social protection schemes, in particular health insurance. Now, a third challenge also as governments in developing countries embark on the road to expand social protection is to make social protection instruments gender sensitive. Too often we see that gender still receives only limited attention in social protection schemes. And, like many others at the OECD, we have repeatedly underlined first that gender-neutral social insurance framework do not guarantee gender-neutral outcomes. And second, that social assistance programs that over-emphasize the role of women as caregivers may actually have some adverse effects. So this is why we believe that for universal social protection to deliver fair and equal outcomes at all stages of the life cycles for women and men, public policy needs to encourage a greater role for men as caregivers and for women as workers, and to better recognize the value of unpaid care work. Now, despite these, challenges, the good news is probably the enormous progress that many countries have made towards universal social protection in recent years, which is actually resulting in a rapidly growing evidence base from all parts of the world. So since 2015, the OECD and Finland have been working together under the European Union Social Protection System program with 10 countries in Asia and Africa that are in the process of expanding their social protection system. And the lessons emerging are, as varied as the countries themselves, but we have found, considerable common ground across the countries, particularly in two key areas. First, many of the countries already possess strong foundations for universal social protection, regardless of their income level. In some cases, the basis is information, as we found, for example, with Cambodia's ID Poor system and Indonesia unified database that serve as a common database for all social assistance programs. In other cases, one or two programs can actually lay the foundation for extension. For example, the success enjoyed by Ethiopia's Productive Safety Net program has not only paved the way for a urban poverty safety net program, but also for a new health initiative. In some other case, matching contributions are the route taken to close the coverage gap. Indonesia's health system, whose progress towards universal coverage is an international success story, is a living example of how governments can expand coverage by subsidizing the contribution of poor workers. Second takeaway, universal social protection can be affordable. As countries increase their fiscal space and the efficiency of public service delivery, so the viability of increasing coverage grows. However, as also shown in many studies, the fairness of social protection financing needs careful monitoring. In Togo, for example, recent OECD analysis shows that fiscal policy reduces inequality but aggravates poverty. So better understanding the impact of taxes and transfer on poverty and vulnerability is absolutely critical. So in a nutshell, while the answers to the massive social protection coverage gap are not always simple, it is crystal clear that innovative solutions exist that can be uncovered from many country experiences. So with this in mind, I would like to welcome our 5 panelists today. So we have the pleasure today to have on my extreme right, Miss Rachel Moussier. Rachel, you're the Deputy Director of the Social Protection Program from the Women in Informal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing, the WEGO think tank, and member also of the Global Coalition for Social Protection floor. Next to you, we have the pleasure to welcome Ms. Aida Kazimalieva, who is a member of the Kyrgyz Parliament and the Committee on Social Affairs of the Kyrgyz Republic. On my right, we have the pleasure to welcome Ms. Salome Indenga, who is the head of the Directorate of Policy and Strategies at the Ministry of Poverty, Eradication and Social Welfare of Namibia. Then on my very left, Pak Maliki, Director of Population Planning and Social Security from Bappenas, Indonesia. Then next to Mr. Maliki, we have Ms. Mirta Denis, who is the Executive Director of the Technical Unit of the Social Cabinet of the Presidency of Paraguay. So, I have a first set of questions for our government officials. So, can you identify one area of social protection where your country has made good progress towards universal provision, and why this was chosen? And based on such experience, can you tell us also more about, the pitfalls encountered and the steps that are needed to ensure that the process of establishing universal coverage runs as smoothly as possible. So may I ask actually Ms. Mirta first to share your thought on that?
Buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much to the organization for the invitation to share with you this afternoon the experience that Paraguay has had in this area and our gradual move towards making social protection universal. In a moment, I'll get into details, but first of all, I'd like to give you a little bit of background about Paraguay. We are recognized already for our capacity for producing raw materials which are useful to a great part of the world. We have economic potential together with the potential for supply of energy, and therefore that puts us in a key position for improving our social policies, and particularly all those related to social protection. I would like to say that over the last decade or so, Paraguay has been able to expand its social protection programs. We've included and attached priority to the poorest groups of the population in terms of income. We've moved from 9% to 32% coverage achieved by our various social protection programs. We have specifically targeted programs for individual groups as well, but generally speaking, as I say, we're giving priority to providing social protection to the poorest people in Paraguay, and that's about 30% of the population. If I were just to focus on one example, I would say this. Over the last 10 years, health coverage in Paraguay has been extremely important. We've implemented a rather audacious policy in order to make the health system universal. In so doing, we've been able to invest more in the remotest, poorest parts of Paraguay. And our coverage rate over the last 10 years has risen from 50% to 80%. That 80%, however, still means that we need to cover 20% of the population, and that's the real major challenge we face now. As far as poverty reduction goes, we've made big strides there too, inter alia, with what I mentioned earlier, expanding health coverage, expanding our social protection programs, but we've also increased education enrollment. We've reduced inequality, we've increased the inclusivity of the system, and all this has meant sustained efforts to bring down poverty. It's not over the last 20 minutes we've been doing this, it's over the last 20 years. 20 years ago, we had 50% of our population living in poverty. That figure is now 26.6%. Having said that, we've still had to make major efforts towards the end of the last government and since the beginning of this one to increase social cohesion in our country. We've now embarked upon a more active policy to do that, and we've involved the population as well in holding a dialogue on what we should be doing. We've been focusing particularly on the social protection system and on what SDG Goal 1.3 says about appropriate social protection systems. We hope that this will get us in the end to a point where we can provide coverage to all our people. We have a high rate of growth at the moment, and that is good, but growth doesn't solve all the problems. We still have a lot of inequality and a lot of people who are in very vulnerable circumstances, and the inequality in particular is a major challenge. Now, it's not only a challenge for the government and for legislators. We have to get civil society and the private sector involved as well, so as to change attitudes and increase understanding. The outgoing government, which went last year, handed over to the new one, and now the new one is driving hard on these issues, and as I say, involving not only the political opposition, but civil society and the private sector as well. We have to get the political opposition on board because we can't develop a proper social protection system without them. So we've been building strategic alliances to help us do our work. And I'd like to pay tribute at this stage to the European Union, which has been helping us to further this wide-ranging dialogue within Paraguay, and it's also involved other international organizations, which has been very helpful. In Paraguay today, we're talking not only about isolated social protection programs, we're talking about a whole social protection system, the ultimate goal of which is to leave no one behind. Since the new government came into force this year, 30% of budgetary resources in Paraguay has been allocated to expanding the social protection system and the social protection programs that make it up. Again, in doing this, we've been attaching the highest level of priority to the most vulnerable, poorest groups, which have so far been left out, because we can't get full coverage unless we ensure they have it as well. Obviously, progress has to be made steadily, year on year, and that means you have to have appropriate allocations from the budget. As somebody said on the previous panel, that means keeping on making sure you get the finance, which is always a problem. We've therefore made very sure to involve our finance ministry. Officials from the finance ministry take active part in our ongoing dialogue, and indeed, the finance ministry is our main ally when it comes to extending social protection coverage. We don't only talk about programs with them, though, we also talk about wider strategy, coordination, organization, and the need to reach the remotest areas of Paraguay. One of the questions the moderator asked us was, what are the major challenges you face? Well, one of our major challenges is governance. That doesn't only mean the government, incidentally, it means other sectors from within society as well, because a social protection system doesn't only involve a government or a political party. It involves the parliament, for example, as well. Certainly in my country it does. And it involves local government, local authorities. And those two latter parties are very, very important. We can't make sure not to leave anyone behind unless we involve everyone from the beginning. Governance to us in Paraguay also means that we have strong institutions for our social protection system and trained people to run it. For that, we need to build alliances with all the parties involved, and that includes our people as well. We need to make sure our people understand their rights, because only if those rights are recognized by government and understood by them will they be assured. As a result of that, our management involves local government, local authorities. It also involves civil society organizations and the private sector at regional and local level. That, we think, is the best way to manage the system. We're building on what exists, but we may have to switch gradually over to another financing system further down the line. By 2020, we hope to have tools that will help us better to manage and coordinate the system. For us, coordination means devolving power, empowering people further down the chain, and that means making sure that local offices and institutions on the ground which are providing benefits and social services to individuals are fully involved. On the next question, I imagine we're going to speak a little bit more about the details of social protection. We, as I said at the beginning, are focusing on the poorest people in Paraguay, but at the same time, we've looked at the issue of the informal economy, work in the informal economy. We want to shrink the informal economy as much as we can, because that will get rid of short-term, unpredictable, what we call precarious work, and it will also help us to expand the social security and social protection systems. For many years, we've been providing social protection through individual isolated programs and not as a whole social protection system. We won't get social protection to the poorest who fall outside the social security system or work in the informal sector unless we look at social protection as a system, not just a series of individual, isolated, unlinked programs. So we are aware of the importance of shrinking the size of the informal economy. We're working on that as hard as we can, and we're doing it in cooperation and through dialogue with the private sector. At the same time, we are aware of the need to strengthen our social security system. Work on that is led not only by the Finance Ministry and by the Social Welfare Ministry, but also the funds which exist in the private sector. I have been warned that I'm running out of time, so I will stop here and leave the floor to other presenters. Thank you.
I think we see from Paraguay an example of a strong political commitment to leave no one behind. That is mirrored in, substantial resources invested in social protection that contribute to a drop in poverty. With also some challenges in terms of governance issues, trying to find the right balance of decision makers at different levels, and the need also to ensure coordination across different line ministries. Thank you very much. Let me now actually turn to Pak Maliki from the Indonesian experience. Can you answer the question?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. Let me answer questions beginning by also describing about the Indonesian case. Indonesia is one of the big fifth, I guess, the most populated countries in the world. We counted around 265 populations in 2018, and we are going to facing a challenges to be an aging populations in the next 1 or 2 years ahead. So it means that we have around 10% of the populations aged more than 60 years old. And in the same time, in the next 5 years, we are going to have also the peak of our young populations. So it means that we are also going to have a challenging in how we can optimize the demographic dividend in our country. In terms of the social protections itself, our constitutions in 1945 already mandated our nations to protect all the peoples, all the peoples, and the country is obligated to support for all the vulnerable, poor and vulnerable, and also the negligence. So that's 1945, but not until 2000, I guess. There is legislations. The government introduced key legislation for the social rights and also the employment programs. And then after that, we also have integrations of the social protections or poverty alleviations programs into our national plan documents. Starting from 2000, I guess there is the strategy, national strategy on the poverty alleviations, and every 5 years we are updating the plans. Since then, we are having a lot of great strides towards the universal health coverage, and also a number of social protection programs keep growing. I guess from OECD record in 2012, it is recorded around 30, and it is growing in 2015 around 37. However, in those years, there's some risk remain across the life cycles, including the high levels of stunting in some areas, indicating that we need to have a better link social protection with the health interventions. Also, relatively high rates, both in the young age and also the elderly populations. And remember that we are going to have aging populations in the next few years. As well as for the youth, we are going to have a peak young populations in the next 5 years. And we still have big homework on how we can improve our labor market policy to be more active, and also how it is can be consistent with the labor demand. So in the past 4 years, so all the development from 2000, and then we have now is 2015, and to 2019, we are going to close this medium-term year, the national medium planning in 2019, so it will be ended. And in the past 4 years, the implementation of the social protection have a great great progress toward integrated system, as well as the better targeting system. So it takes us to single digits poverty rates in the last month. And referring to your questions on how we are having one of the most successful social protections for all is, actually we can name two. One is the most successful social protections in the coverage is our national health insurance. It covers around almost 80%. And I think we are going to discuss that a bit later. But one thing is that actually about almost striking is the other sources, potential sources of the village fund utilization. So I think from 2015 we are starting to have the village fund transfer to the village level, and now it's covering almost like 80,000 villages, and the fund is growing. The utilization of the fund itself is actually directed towards more having job opportunities like public works programs, also empowerment of the people at the village level, social infrastructures such as I think the most one is the clinics and also the early childhood, and And more recent years is we have also focused the utilization of the village funds for the cash and in-kind transfer to for the Cash for Works programs. And this is, I think this is also contributed very significantly to reducing the poverty to the single digits for the last year, as well as to reduce the inequality, both at national level as well as the village level. Even though, like a few months ago, the inequality increasing slightly increasing in the village level, but I thought it is back declining, and we see there is a potential of the economic growth in the village because of this fund. And if we are talking the potentials of the village funds, also it's opened more access, successfully opened the access for the isolated group, especially for the civil registrations and also vital statistics. And now there's a lot of people from the outer islands as well as the isolated places to have birth certificates. And this one is opened, almost like open all the access to other government programs, especially the social protections. The challenges, I guess, still remain. How actually we can direct the fund to provide more access to the low-income populations for a better job, and also how to use the fund is to catalyze long-term gains on the investment on the human capital. I guess the village level village fund is a very powerful tool, because this one is a basic fund that a fund that can build a very basic infrastructures of the social protections in the village level. So then it can be like combating some of the programs, like combating stunting through more building social infrastructure, and also building more social cohesions to strengthen information platform at the village level of the importance of civil registration and vital statistic. The information technology also now is being enhanced because of the village funds. The internet penetrations in the village level, I think it's almost doubled since like the last 2 years, and it gives more open opportunity for, especially for the women in the village level, because some of the village women's like have an access to open the business through the internet. And if you can imagine that if the infrastructures between the village and also to the economic centers is open by using this fund, they can have more better access for the economic activity, because now in Indonesia the internet business is opening up and grow very rapidly, and this is a very good opportunity for also for the poor populations to have more access to the economic activity. I think that's for now.
Thank you, Pak Maliki. I think a very interesting example. You had mentioned actually the specific context of Indonesia with aging population, yet also the young population really reaching a peak, and the importance of reconciling social and labor market policy. Let me now go to Ms. Kazimalieva. So, on the Kyrgyz example, I guess you have also many things to share with us.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If everybody's got the interpretation, then I'll start the presentation. Thank you. I'd like to begin to give you a few pieces of information about Kyrgyzstan, her approach, and her efforts to achieve universal social protection. As other people have said, it does tend to be with us as well, rather one step forward and two steps back. We have a lot of factors afflicting what we can do, the political situation, and I'll tell you about that in a few moments. Also, a lack of funds in the budget, that's inevitable. But let me begin by just giving you a little bit of background about Kyrgyzstan. The basic statistics, which will give you a slightly clearer understanding of what's been happening in Kyrgyzstan. We have a population of 6 million people, just over that, as a matter of fact. and 25% of those people live in poverty. 0.7% of the population live in severe poverty. Of the total population, 38% is formed up of young people under the age of 18, and 10% of the population are pensioners. Today, with your permission, I'd like to concentrate on the efforts which the Kyrgyz Parliament and government have been making since we 2 years ago began to try and overhaul and reform our social protection system so as to provide family allowances to families with children and make sure there is a more universal approach to the whole social protection issue in Kyrgyzstan. Alas, so far, our efforts have not achieved their goals. We do have free education, free of charge, in Kazakhstan. Children are treated in our health institutions up to the age of 5 free of charge. And a few years ago, a group of MPs, including myself, submitted a bill to tackle the issue of state payments for children from poor families. We'd had that system for some time. We tried to replace it by a 3-stage system. Firstly, $85 were paid on the birth of the child. The second stage was a universal category-based welfare payment. For each child up to the age of 3, approximately $10 per month was paid out. And the third stage was for families with many children. Benefits started to be paid from the third child onwards. As to why that was done, our research and investigation showed that poverty usually starts when a family has 3 children or more. On the second stage, from 0 to 3 years, we tried very hard to make sure that every child was paid a welfare payment because, again, according to our research, that would contribute considerably to cutting poverty. There were several aspects to this issue of paying welfare payments for children. 60% of children in the past actually fell through the net. The system didn't see the children, and inevitably the poorest children from the poorest families ended up not getting the welfare payments, and that's basically because we had rampant corruption. Families were receiving the benefits, but in a lot of cases they were families who didn't need them in the first place. There were also the bureaucratic obstacles. Families had to get through an awful lot of official documentation to actually register for the benefits, and as a result, they didn't go through these steps and they didn't get the benefits. I already mentioned poverty hitting families after they had had a third child or more. And what we wanted to do was make it easier for those families to get the benefits to which they were entitled. These reforms were agreed by the Parliament. The bill was signed off by the President. But then we had a new government come in. We had new presidential elections. We had a complete change around in the political situation. And there were very considerable, lengthy, heated discussions as to why wealthier families were getting benefits when poorer families were not. Things became very tense. There were an awful lot of difficulties that didn't necessarily have anything to do with the benefits. Some people were saying, look, I've only got 2 children, but I live in poverty. Why can't I have the benefits? Why do I have to have a third child before I get them? That kind of thing. It made it very difficult to get the policy across and to get it through. Then we had international financial institutions who came in to Kyrgyzstan because we had financial problems. And I mentioned taking 2 steps forward. I've described the 2 steps forward. In 2008, we were forced to take a considerably larger step back. we've got the benefit for the child on its birth, but the rest, we haven't really managed to get the success we wanted, particularly in the way of providing benefits to the poorest families. In the Parliament at the moment, we're working extremely hard, and we've set up a working group for that purpose, in order to try and get a clearer picture across the country of what our major problems are and where they are. We want to bring in the system we tried to bring in 2007 and failed to do, that is benefits for all children up to the age of 3. And to make sure that those payments are made to the right people and on time, so at least the children are fed and clothed properly. That, we feel, will help to cut poverty levels, and it will help families also over the longer term. The Working Party in Parliament is carrying out surveys, getting in the data now, and we do hope that in a fairly short time we will be able to analyze the data, make changes to the legislation that we need, and this time I hope we actually manage to get to do it. We have had some success. However, it's not all failure. We are including the SDGs in our national programs, and we're on our way to achieving them. We have a strategy for that purpose, which is supposed to get us to hit all of them by 2040. And that includes social protection. We have a plan running to 2040. The President has signed off on it. We do have the determination and the will to push this policy, and we hope we can get it through. The government legislative program, to a very great extent, coincides with what we're intending to do through the social protection system development strategy, and the Parliament has a major role to play. Indeed, I'd go so far as to say the Parliament is responsible to a great extent for coordination. We hope to hit the SDGs before our target deadline, and we're carrying out a survey to see if we will be able to. That is a quick picture of the positives and the negatives, and that's the situation we have. Thank you.
About the experience of Kyrgyzstan, which is an interesting example of a country that has built, a strong social protection system articulated around the needs of the elderly and children, and which is now, I think, in a complex and difficult discussions about the extension of the child benefit systems towards universalizations, and we understand that there's a lot of discussions for and against. Mm-hmm. So we wish you all the best on that discussion. Let me turn to Ms. Indenga, and then going to Namibia and sharing the experience of Namibia. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Good after lunch to every one of us. We are very much delighted to be part of this conference as a country, and we also appreciate the efforts that we are doing toward social protections, and we are very happy that our efforts are recognized worldwide. We are very much happy to share this afternoon our experience on with the rest of the world on this important gesture of social protection. So, as a country, Namibia have various social protection programs. So, if I can highlight some of the programs that we implement as a country, we have cash transfers, which includes transfer for old age and disability grants. We have also child grant. We also have a veteran grant. So those are the types of cash transfers that we have. So in terms of other social protection, we have free education for both primary and secondary education. We also have social assistance for the social assistance loans and grants for the university registered youth. And then in addition to that, we also provide assistance for vocational trainings and skill development. And we also have income-generating projects for women and youth. So that just to give you a broader picture of some of the programs on social protection that we are implementing. But what I can share with you is one of our area in which we are doing very well as a country is the implementation of the old pension grant and the disability grant. So those are the two grants that we are doing very well as a country. So we have made a significant progress on extending social protection to our old age population as well as to the persons that are living with disability. And our law have compelled us actually to do that. So we have a law on old age pension that is also covering the disability grant, and it's a commitment that the government have made, and that provides some sustainability in terms of social protection for these categories that I've just highlighted. In terms of coverage for the old age, we have covered about 93% of the old age population. Our population for old age is 7%, so which means for the 7% old age, we have covered 93% of that category. While for the disability population, we have covered 67% of that population, and that might even be more because according to our old pension act, not all the persons that are disabled are eligible. So we are looking at a specific type of disability where a person is not able to do something for themselves. So we are providing grant for that category. And then all in all, for the two grants, the coverage currently stands at 9.6% of the population. So 9.6% of our population is covered on those two grants for the two categories. What I can say in terms of opportunities, as it was highlighted by my presenter, my moderator here, is that with the universal basic grant for the two categories that I have highlighted, we have made significant progress in reducing poverty. So currently, our country poverty rate stands at 17.4 for the upper bound and 11% for the lower bound. So we have really made a significant progress because in 2003, figures was standing at 37.4%. So I must say we have made significant progress there. So what we are seeing is that the basic social grant have really contributed towards poverty eradication, and not only for the beneficiaries alone, but also for the dependents of the beneficiary, because with this money, the old age persons were able to send their grandchildren and children to school, and they were also able to access health and cover for other necessities. So statistics have also indicated that of the grants that we are providing, for every dollar that we spend on this or that we give on this grant, we are able to get to reduce poverty by a $0.31. So which means it's really very significant towards the reduction of poverty in the country. And I think one of the reasons why we have been able to implement this, and we did very well, is that we have a political commitment from both from the current government as well as the political parties. So there is a strong commitment for us to reach out and have prosperity for all. And I think that have really contributed us, very much for us to be where we are today. And also, in addition, we have a commitment from fiscal perspective. much of our national expenditure have been dedicated toward social protection programs. And I must say that for the current budget, which is the budget for the 2018-19, we have 8.7%, or rather around 9%, of the government expenditure being dedicated to this cash transfer. And when I talk about this, it's the old age grant, is the disability grant, the child grant, as well as the veterans grant. And I must say it's an achievement for us as a country, because our population is around 2.2%, and if we can cover, like I've indicated, if we have covered around 9.6% of this population, I think it's an achievement that we have made as a country. In terms of challenges, I've indicated that we have been able to reduce poverty to 17.4 and 11%. However, we cannot say the same in terms of inequality. So these types of grants have really been significant toward the reduction of poverty, but we can't say the same for the inequality, because inequality still remain high in Namibia. We have a ratio of 0.56, which is really high for a country like us, Namibia. So in terms of the challenges, in addition now to the inequality, there is also a challenge of fragmentation. So our social protection programs are very much fragmented, and there is ineffective in coordination or inefficiency in the coordination of this type of programs. So we have different programs, we have even people that might be benefiting from the same, different programs. And this, we can blame it on a lack of a social registry as a country. So if we had a social registry that we are able to register our social programs in one go, and then we'll be able to trace who is earning from what. So like I've indicated, this leads us to have people that are double dipping, so benefiting from various programs, while we have others that are not benefiting from any. So we have problems of inclusion and exclusion, and then that limits the availability of funds to be allocated to those that are not earning anything. For example, we have a coverage from 0 age to 16, and then we jump to 60 and above. So which means in between there is a group that is not benefiting from any of the grant, where there is also a need, because in most cases we have unemployed youth in that category. Some of them are not even able to find jobs because they are unskilled. So that then leaves us with that gap of how we can then make a provision so that we cover for those. So now, for us to address some of the challenges that I have indicated, we are embarking upon a reform, which is, as a country, we are trying to develop a social protection policy framework with the assistance of UNICEF and OECDs and EU SPS. So I must applaud these partners for assisting us in this grant, so that we can have a framework for social protection, so that we are able to improve on coordination and also have an effective social protection. So we have made a draft policy, and its consultations are still ongoing. Once we have finalized it, we will have it approved, and then we start with the implementation. But I must say that the proposal, some of the proposals that we are making in this social protection framework includes the development of a social registry. So a lot of countries this morning have been highlighting on the need of us to have a uniform system where we can register all the social protection program, and it will enable us to save some money that we can divert to other social protection programs if we bring in efficiency. So also, in addition to that, perhaps if I can highlight some of the proposal that we are making in terms of the development of this social protection policy, I must say we are looking at the option of universal maternity and healthcare coverage. We are also looking at options of universal child grant, because currently what we have realized is that for the child grants that we are currently implementing, we have only reached out to 34% of the child population. And with this, we have also realized that the benefit of the poor to the rich is almost equal, because we have the poor and rich benefiting on a 49-51% ratio. So which means 51% of the poor are benefiting, and also equally 49% of the kids that are not supposed to be benefiting are also benefiting because of the way we are implementing it, because it's now not universal. So what we are seeing is that it's better to cover everybody than leaving out some and then the other ones are not benefiting. So those are some of the issues that we are looking at. And in addition, lastly, we are also proposing providing proposal for resource mobilization, where we need to find ways in which we are going to cover the implementation for these types of programs that we are envisaging, so that we don't just have a policy for the sake of having it, we also have a policy that is implementable. So that's what I can share with you this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Idega. So I think we just heard from the experience of Namibia, so an interesting experience in terms of, a country that has made good progress in universal coverage when it comes to the elderly and the disabled population. Also a number of challenges that lie ahead in terms of, addressing the inequality issue. Good progress were made in terms of poverty reduction, but inequality remain high. Fragmentation you had mentioned, and also the need now also to look at the way to expand, the health coverage and maternity and child benefits. So thank you very much. Let me now turn to Ms. Moussier, who has been working extensively on informality and social protection. So, Rachel, we know that, in the Global South, a majority of people typically depends on the informal economy for their livelihoods. So, an important question is how social assistance and social insurance schemes can be directed towards the needs of informal economy workers as a way to tackle the vulnerability challenge that they experience. So, from your experience, Rachel, how effective and equitable have been the approaches taken so far to tackle the vulnerability challenge in the informal economy?
Great. Thank you, Alexandre, and good afternoon, everyone. I will start by introducing just a little bit about who we are at WIGO. WIGO is a global policy research action network that brings together informal workers' organizations, academics, and development practitioners committed to securing livelihoods for the working poor, especially women in the informal economy. As Alexandre mentioned, we are also a member of the Global Coalition for Social Protection Floors, which represents over 100 civil society organizations, trade unions, and think tanks around the world, advocating for the implementation of ILO Recommendation 202 on national social protection floors. So that's just a bit of where we are coming from and the work that we've been doing and our allies. In response to the question, I want to go to the most recent ILO World Social Protection Report, which identifies the missing middle as those informal workers who are neither covered by social assistance nor by social insurance and have limited or no access to social services. And today, we know that the informal economy represents 2 billion people, about 60% of the global labor force. It is not a homogeneous group, therefore there is no one-size-fits-all approach or strategy in terms of extending social protection. We know that women are at the base of the economic pyramid within the informal economy as own account workers, industrial outworkers, contributing family workers. They have a higher risk of poverty than men informal workers due to their working conditions and are among the least protected across their life cycle. These women are home-based workers. They are street and market traders or waste pickers. Women are also disproportionately represented in low-paid wage employment in the informal economy as domestic workers and care providers. We draw, therefore, in our analysis at WeGo on the London Srinivas framework to determine the risks and correlating protections needed for informal workers. The framework was published by the ILO back in 2002 and outlines 3 key factors for governments to consider in designing social protection schemes to reach informal workers. The first is the nature of work. This means the sector of work, the status in employment, and the place of work. The second is gender as a social determinant of risk, and the third is the stage in the life cycle. Applying this framework allows us to identify the key gaps governments must address to achieve universal rights-based social protection by 2030. So let me identify some of the challenges we are seeing, and which many of the speakers have alluded to in their presentations. First of all, extending social insurance to informal workers is complicated, but it's not impossible. We've seen for employed women workers in the informal economy, such as domestic workers and other care workers, their employers' contributions to Social Security can make a significant difference to the protections they benefit from. However, the ILO estimates that 90% of domestic workers are legally excluded from Social Security systems, so there is a significant gap in coverage. At the same time, we know that care work and care jobs is a growing source of employment for women, and therefore offer an opportunity for more decent work. For self-employed women workers in the informal economy, voluntary contributory schemes are often not conducive due to their low earnings. In addition, if only informal workers are contributing to these schemes, then they are likely to fail, as the cumulative risks are high while the funds remain low. Coming to social assistance schemes, we have noticed some of the challenges that lead to the exclusion of women women workers in the informal economy. The first, not surprisingly, was just mentioned by our colleague here from Namibia regarding targeting. And it's often that targeted social assistance grants mean that women informal workers are often not deemed sufficiently poor to merit the social assistance because they are earning an income. This is linked to, as well as a bias in their current design and implementation, where social assistance schemes tend to focus on those who are not in the labor force, such as children, people living with severe disabilities, and the elderly. Though coverage rates remain low even for these groups, there are fewer schemes in place to address the needs of the working age population. For instance, less attention is given to maternity benefits than to child grants, even though both are absolutely critical if we are to improve health outcomes for women and children. Conditionalities attached to cash transfers, such as child grants, reinforce women's role as caregivers while ignoring their role as income earners, as was discussed through the OECD study as well. Governments should not stereotype women in social assistance program as only mothers and carers. We also recognize and, of course, support universal rights-based social protection, but recognize that in certain cases the cash transfers are of low value. And this poses us a challenge for women informal workers. For instance, taking the case of social pensions, the low value of the social pension doesn't replace women's income. And so we see women informal workers continuing to work well beyond the national retirement age in order to continue to earn an income while also having care responsibilities, either for their grandchildren, for children or other aging adults in their households, and at the same time requiring care for themselves as they grow older. Finally, social assistance is not a sufficient response to address this risk women informal workers face in the labor market. Women informal workers need social services such as quality public health and childcare. Women bear disproportionate responsibility for care work in their households, lengthening their working days. When a member of their family is sick or requires care, it is women primarily who stop work and lose out on their daily incomes. Therefore, access to social services and social protection, the combination of both, can protect women's income and boost the positive impact cash transfers can have on both poverty and income inequality. Finally, women informal workers, and this seems quite obvious, but sadly is not necessarily the case, need labor protections. Without employment contracts for domestic workers or municipal trading licenses for street traders and waste pickers, securing their economic activity, informal workers do not have a guarantee that they can return to work after a maternity leave or after sick leave. Social protection can never be a panacea for poor working conditions and a lack of labor regulation. So we hold that it's a combination of social insurance, social assistance, and access to quality public services that can lead to universal social protection coverage, which includes all workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Let me ask you a follow-up question. I mean, you obviously indicate that progress in universal social protection has been uneven when it comes to the coverage of informal economy workers. On a more positive side, can you identify successful examples of of how social protection can actually be extended to workers, especially vulnerable workers in the informal economy?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think it is important to I'm going to start first on examples from social insurance, because I think sometimes this is one of the biggest stumbling blocks in terms of approaching the extension of social protection to informal workers. In thinking of successful examples, we start from the premise that the standard employment relationship is not and has never been the norm in the global South. Therefore, we have to rethink the linkages between informal workers and capital. We have examples of informal workers' organizations collaborating with governments and the private sector to find creative solutions to extend social insurance to self-employed workers. I'm going to give one example. In India, Matadi boards were established in the state of Maharashtra to ensure better working conditions and social protection for the porters employed by market traders to move their goods. Those hiring a porter pay wages directly to the board, and added to this is a contribution towards social protection for the porters. Now, well-known scheme in Latin America is the monotributo system, the monotax system, a simplified tax and contribution collection mechanism for micro-enterprises that has been implemented in Uruguay, Argentina, Brazil, and Ecuador. In Uruguay, the micro-entrepreneurs that sign up to the monotax are entitled to the benefits of the national contributory social security system, except for unemployment benefit. It's proven to be an effective tool for extending social security coverage to women independent workers in particular. The reason these schemes work in comparison to voluntary schemes is that self-employed informal workers' contributions are cross-subsidized by the social security contributions of formal workers and their employers. Another example that we see is informal workers' organizations are also providing services to their members when public services are either lacking or inadequate. In Ghana, the Greater Accra Market Association, who is a member of WIGO, represents 40,000 informal traders in the city, and it manages a childcare center in one of the city's largest markets. we did a scoping of childcare centers in and near markets, and it turns out that for 42 markets in Accra, there are only 7 childcare centers, accepting no more than, in totality, 160 children. So it's quite a small amount of coverage. Market traders have been able to organize and cross-subsidize the fees that they pay to cover the childcare cost of head porters who earn a far lower income. Of course, the childcare center is not sustainable without government support and subsidies. We see a similar example from the Self-Employed Women's Association, SEWA, a trade union of close to 2 million women informal workers who've set up childcare cooperatives in the state of Gujarat. Again, this was in response from women informal workers because the public child care center was only open 4 hours a day, and it led to too few hours for women informal workers to earn enough for the day. So what can we conclude from these examples? First is informal workers' organizations must be part of the negotiations with government, formal sector trade unions, and employers in the design and implementation of social protection schemes and the delivery of public services. Though initiatives led by informal workers' organizations, trade unions, and cooperatives may be small-scale, some can serve as pilots, demonstrating that it is possible to reach vulnerable and disadvantaged groups. Governments can support the most effective schemes and integrate these into national social protection systems. Second, we cannot abandon the extension of social insurance for informal workers as a pillar of national social protection systems. Governments must explore contributory schemes that do not only rely on contributions from informal workers alone, but also draw resources from those who profit from their work and public authorities, while encouraging cost subsidies from formal sector contributions. Third, the way in which national social protection systems are financed can either enhance or undermine the redistribution of resources towards the working poor. Extending social insurance coverage can help to achieve a better financing mix for social protection system, which alleviates pressures on tax-financed social assistance benefits. However, we recognize that governments do need to expand the tax base, yet tax systems are, in many countries, becoming more regressive, increasingly dependent on indirect taxes. Corporate tax rates continue to decline amidst the global background of aggressive corporate tax avoidance and evasion. In this context, proposals to bring informal workers into the tax net in order to expand the tax base may lead to regressive financing models. Certainly, there are some workers in the informal economy who can afford to pay income and corporate taxes. Most, though, are too poor to pay income taxes. Women informal workers are among the poorest and are unlikely to meet the income tax thresholds. However, they do pay indirect taxes, such as VAT, as well as municipal licensing fees, tolls, and rent to operate in public spaces. Poor informal workers, particularly women, have less leverage with local authorities to negotiate these tax rates. Therefore, what are the terms of a new social contract with workers in the informal economy? As the missing middle of social protection coverage, their inclusion in contributory schemes and the national tax system must come with a corresponding and significant increase in universal social protection and quality social services. In addition, a more progressive financing mix is needed alongside the enforcement of labor regulations if governments are to address not only poverty, but also growing inequalities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rachel. I think you have highlighted so many important points, including the role for what we could call an enhanced social dialogue that also includes representative from the informal economy. The importance also of looking at the extension debate, both from the perspective of social assistance, but also social insurance, and ensuring also the responsibility of employers and employees that are in need form of employment, and keeping in mind also that, unfortunately, in many cases, I mean, the tax system is regressive, and this is to be kept in mind when we think about tax-based financing for social protection. Now, I'd like to turn to you, Ipu, as I know that you have also, more specific questions for our distinguished panelists. I think we have another 10 minutes. Yeah.
I was going to wonder if I could just change the
Sure.
Thank you very much, and also from my side, it's welcome and it's really great to be here. We've had very rich responses and examples, very concrete examples, and we were going to kind of dig deeper into your cases, but in fact, you all have already talked in quite comprehensively about the different social protection policies across life course, and including universal health coverage. Therefore, if I may, I will change the plan just a little bit and ask, in the interest of time, so that we can respect the time allocation we have. Could you, each of you, identify one thing that you think could really help you in terms of improving the implementation and going forward? So if you had a magic wand, then what would it be that you would change in order to achieve universal social protection in your own context, and what has been the priority for you as you have identified? And if you can just tell us that one thing, and we can start from Mr. Maliki.
Thank you. I guess we are going to continue with our own case on the health insurance, national health insurance, that, as mentioned earlier, that we have one of the most successful universal social protections, almost universals in Indonesia, and as well as I think in the world, is that we have this national health insurance that cover almost 80% of the populations, that count for like 200 million of the peoples. And this one is like the largest single payers of the health insurance in the world. For example, in 2017, we managed for more than like almost 200 million consultations, health consultations, all over Indonesia. And this one is enable us to reduce the equity problems on the health access in Indonesia. This is happens because I think also the same with that we have the government, very strong government commitment on both sides, both in the supply side as well as the demand side. In the demand side itself, the government has mandated in the constitutions that we support for the vulnerables, the poor and vulnerables, and especially in this case we support for 40% lowest income populations. So if you ask how we would like to proceed to have better implementations of this health insurance, is that how we actually can address, as previously mentioned, how we can address, says like the missing middle, because says the government already cover for the 40% of the lowest population, and then some of the populations says like the formals can afford for the premiums, and there is some borders between the 40% and the middle income that count usually like informal workers that they have income, but they cannot afford for the subsidy. This is quite a challenge for us, and the challenge is that they actually easily come into the system, but then they cannot like sustain their memberships. So this is, I think this is requires more like intersectoral, interbody, or intergovernmental effort, because the role of the government here is quite important. One thing is that the central government already have supported the 40%, and there is also the local government supported for another on top of the populations. This is, I think, we require like strong coordinations between the local and also the central government on how we can better targeting. And Indonesia is I think also have more advanced developing on the single database, unified database, and it's growing and developing into more advanced systems. They call it 6G, and these 2 years, the last 2 years, we are in the era of how we can integrate the social registry with the civil registration system. That allows, I guess, these integrations between the poor or the 40% and the total populations to have a better targeting for the whole sources that we have, both on the central and also the local government.
Excellent. Thank you very much. You're really focusing on equity, also bringing up the missing middle as a focus for that is required for big change. What about Paraguay?
Actually, I didn't think that the question would be so difficult. To begin with, we are champions concerning social protection, but it's difficult to choose one kind. We were talking about a magic wand, so I'd like to begin with two main sectors. First of all, to ensure that we have a basic layer of protection for the life cycle. I think this would ensure that nobody remains behind. We have to give basic provision for children, early childhood, education, and health. I think this is fundamental. And then we have to involve children involvement early for all developing countries. And following this line of thought, we have to know the cohorts that need training, youth, and include them in formal education or tertiary education for vocational reasons, and learning how to use technology and innovation with the market models that we have available. We must ensure that services are provided to the population that are working and that are currently excluded from the social system, and continue to support that is given for older people who are living in poverty, who have been working all their lives but have not been able to pay into a fund that will protect them. And so we have ethical questions and rights issues. So we have to be able to give them food to help them. So following the idea of not letting anybody lag behind, we have to aim at a more universal system and work in terms of a life cycle and work progressively. And at the same time, in delving deeper, we must work for greater reforms. And here, I would say we should look at Social Security. In Paraguay today, 2 out of every 10 workers are paying into a security system, and the others are excluded. And they are not protected. And this goes beyond the main population that is living in poverty. We're talking about a population that is working, but still don't have guarantees that when they grow older, they will have a secure future. So, along with this, of course, we talk about social security networks and broadening the system. This has been very important, but we still have 20% of people who are excluded from the health system. And there are even more vulnerable populations who are being left behind and who are excluded from the working population. I'd like to add one further element. Using the magic wand again. On the one hand, we have benefits that we give out, but we have to talk about quality as well. For health, for education, this is a very important element, and we will be carrying out reforms that will help us in this direction. These are major elements. I'm only going to point these out for the time being. But we have to have a basic package providing minimum coverage for people in different cycles of life, social security, and of course ensure that the most vulnerable population is covered as well.
That's excellent. You, again, are talking about system, progressive realization, universalism, and also kind of echoing similar things to do with equity, as we heard from Indonesia. I will give you the wands after this session. But before that, we move to Kyrgyzstan. One change that would really make a difference and speed up progress for you.
Насколько я поняла, вы задаете вопрос, что вы бы хотели изменить, одну вещь, которая поменяла бы ситуацию. Я правильно поняла? No translation?
No translation.
Okay. Я уже говорила, что в нашей стране 70% людей заняты в неформальной экономике, да, то есть мы не видим декларации, мы не видим, у нас нет единой базы данных. Кроме этого, 60% из самых бедных детей не получают по ошибке исключения детские пособия. Я все-таки буду говорить из перспективы защиты детей, про детские пособия. И я долго думала над этим вопросом, он очень важный. Я считаю, как миссия, как политика, моя миссия – это вот защищенные дети. У нас сейчас в Кыргызстане проблема с насилием детей. И я это очень сильно связываю с тем…
We have a problem in my country concerning violence that children are subjected to. And we have missed something. The children are not necessarily protected. We have to change this situation. You've asked me what I could do if I had a magic wand, and I think that we have to have a single numeric data bank, a digital data bank. And the health ministry is now carrying this out. And the data bank that does exist has to all be grouped together, the different parts. We have to fight against corruption. We have to have reliable data to be able to provide services to children, to poor families. Services should not, and benefits should not remain in people's personal pockets. They must be given to the families that so direly need it. Large families need to be helped and pulled out of poverty. Secondly, in Kyrgyzstan, politicians, legislators, my colleagues, decision makers do not sometimes understand why we have to lend a hand to children, why they need to be properly fed, why they have rights. This is something that they must understand. Within the next 10 or 20 years, this situation will be changing. But currently, there are many cases of child rape, of murder, kidnapping. And that gives us the impression that we're not supporting children sufficiently. We need to have communication campaigns to explain how important it is to protect children to the population. And since we've all gathered here today, I think this is something that we need to do in Kyrgyzstan, and I hope it will bear fruit. Thank you.
Super, thank you very much. You're talking about, again, what do you need to support systems in terms of reliable data, good governance, but also awareness of child protection, what it means and how it is implemented. Thank you. Finally, what's your one change that you would push in Namibia?
Thank you very much for the question. For me, I am going for a single registry because it will help us to address challenges of inclusion and exclusion, which will then release funds that we would be able to cover those that are not covered, and also it will help to better up our implementation, because most of the time we are not able to implement because we are not coordinated and we are not registering in a single registry, and that will then help us to trace who is getting what type of assistance from the government. And lastly, I would go for universal child grant, because for me, spending on children is not an expenditure but an investment. So I thank you.
Thank you very much. The whole concept of coordination is central, isn't it? Just one word of life course. We've seen the kind of instruments across life course. I remember when the SDGs were being prepared, sitting in a meeting where we were having conversations about what should be included in the SDGs. And there were 23 representatives, all representing one vulnerable group. We had women, well, that's 50% of the population. We had persons with disabilities. We had children. We had girl children. We had youth. We had ethnic minorities, 23 groups. And the point was to argue which one was the most vulnerable. Now, this is hardly development. And I think that the life course approach is a mindset. And we have seen here, everybody has been talking about systems. So to move away from the silos of vulnerable groups, because nobody is vulnerable inherently. It is the environment that makes us so. And looking at life course and looking at the transition risks across life course and what happens to a woman depending on how her childhood it is or how her functional ability is to old age is how we need to think. And that's where social protection is fundamental, because this is a system that really does address all the points of risks and risks of transition for everybody. And I just really want to thank all of you on the panel and my co-moderator for this session and the kind of depth of the conversation. And indeed, we have the ones at the back, so we'll have a chat afterwards. Thank you.